Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started. And the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about the issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. Hello, it's Rachel here, solo. You've just got me today. And I was looking back over the schedule and saw that the last time I did one of these, it was April, and now it's July. My goodness me. How the world has changed since April, and how the world had changed in April since the beginning of the year. That seems to be the way we're living our lives now. It's just changing every minute, every millisecond, certainly from 1 week to the next or 1 month to the next. It's just all so very different, isn't it? So here I am. I thought I'd come and share a few things with you again. I'm more positive this time round than when I started the last solo episode, although I'm just as overwhelmed with where the world is and how we're now going to be living. But I think that's the key thing, isn't it? That now it's not about getting to the end of this, whatever this is. It's about living with a whole new way of living and adapting and coping and getting used to remembering your mask when you leave the house and remembering your hand sanitizer and remembering to maintain your distance if somebody is not in your household. And as the world starts to open up, and certainly the UK is really starting to open up now, that doesn't actually make me feel more confident. It makes me feel more nervous because I realise now that the onus is on us to make sure that we stay healthy, or we do as much as we possibly can to stay healthy and to keep everybody else healthy as well. There's definitely a shift in focus, and I've always thought this about the mask wearing, and I really do think that when possible, it's a good idea to wear a mask, because it's not about protecting us, it's about protecting other people. And for me now, sort of whenever I'm having a little contretemps with my beloved about, levels of care that we need to have in place, I think in terms of, if I'm able to see my mum, I need to keep myself healthy and infection free, not for myself, but because I do not want to take anything to her. And talking about that, I did finally go and see my mum. Gosh, can't believe it really. It was just last weekend. Quite emotional. It had taken me a long time to pluck up the courage to go because of what I just said. I didn't want to take anything to her, and coming from London. So my mum's up in the Midlands, and that's actually got higher infection rates now, I think, at time of recording than London. So it took a long time for me to feel confident that the infection rates around me had dropped, but also that, I had kept myself as infection free as I could to be able to go and see her. And the issue is that, while we could have done a day trip, it would have been a pretty hard day trip really to go up there and come back all in a day, and then what were we going to do, sit outside? So we did decide to stay over. And when I first walked in, I was determined, I was going to keep my distance. And then I just realised it just wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible. And, she wasn't going to wear a mask all the time. We'd already had that argument before I walked in the door. And so it's really difficult because, what are you going to do? Are you going to wipe down every surface that you touch as you touch it? I'm sure some of you listening will think, oh my goodness me, Rachel is totally paranoid. And perhaps I am, but I've been sort of stunned by the magnitude of this, and I am concerned about a second wave when it comes to COVID. I think that complacency will be our undoing I just see what's happening in the States, and as you know, if you listen to this, you'll know my son is over in the States, and I can't get to him. Technically, he probably could get to me, but I can't get to him. That's just a horrible feeling. I'm seeing the way that the complacency in America is leading to just crazy levels of cases, and I just wish they would stop spouting on about their freedoms being curtailed and just wear the freaking masks and just get with the program. But anyway, so one of the reasons I'm feeling at least more upbeat, even if I'm still a bit overwhelmed, is that I've been talking to all these amazing women, particularly on the podcast, but also within my community, and just generally connecting. And I think it's really lovely that we have all of this technology now that enables us to do that. I know people are talking about Zoom fatigue, but for me, I work in my office from home, and I'm always using Zoom. I'm always interviewing people over Zoom, or just chatting to them, or collaborating, or whatever it might be. So I'm very used to talking to people on camera and talking to people over microphones, as I'm doing with you now. So for me, it's like not a big deal. It's just business as usual, really. But it's interesting that the world is being forced to do what my world is, which is rather nice for a change. So, but I've been talking to some amazing, amazing women. One of the ones that I would pull out, as I'm still sort of talking about COVID and the fact that the responsibility has shifted now to us, is my episode with Angela Council, who's a naturopath from Australia. And we talk about menopause, hormones and immune systems. And as you may not really realise, and I didn't really realise, I sort of kind of knew this in the back of my head, but I hadn't had it so systematically confirmed for me as Angela was able to do, that they are intrinsically linked, and that stress impacts our hormones, impacts our immune systems. Looking after our immune systems will help our hormones and therefore help our menopause transition. So the link between these is massive, and it's a really interesting episode. So go and listen to that if you want to get in the best possible shape to support your immune system. You can't boost your immune system overnight, but there are ways that you can live your life that will enable you to have it as strong as it can be, so that it can support you as and when it needs to. So that if we do get this infection, we can move through it swiftly. Okay, so that's one to listen to. Then, of course, since I did my last solo pondering podcast, we've had all of the Black Lives Matter movement kicking off, and that has had a profound impact on me. If you have been listening, you'll know I've done 2 podcasts specifically on this. I just felt that I needed to share the voices of the 2 women that were generous enough to come and talk to me. The first one was Kwavi Agbe, who has been on the podcast before. She's just the most amazing woman. I just love her to bits. She's such fun. But she came and talked to me, particularly about her experience of racism. She is not born and bred in the US. She's an immigrant to the US, but she's been there for over 25 years, and she's got 2 teenage sons. I have a son as well, but my son isn't black. And it was really heartbreaking, really, to hear her talk about her fear, when they go out, and knowing that they will be seen differently to other people who are not the same colour as they are. And then the second episode was with Kimberly McCormick, who has the most calm and beautiful and generous way of getting through white defensiveness about racism. And this is what I've been learning about, is that it's very easy, if you're white as I am, and I'm going to sound all shades of privilege here, so just bear with me, because one thing I've learned as I tread carefully into this area is that I will get it wrong. And if I get it wrong, I just have to go, I'm sorry, I got it wrong, or just realise that what I just said wasn't particularly sensitive or whatever it might be. But it's better, I think, to make those mistakes than to not try at all. Kimberly has this wonderful way of getting through white defensiveness, of explaining that for black people born and bred in the US, that everything they're living with now is experienced and seen through the lens of 400 years of oppression. And that is massive, absolutely massive. And while it's another of those things that I kind of knew in the back of my head, focusing in on it and really thinking about it and sitting with it and trying to understand it is huge and can really shift the way we think about it. So all of this sort of activity led me to read a couple of books and listen to a lot of podcasts. Brene Brown is doing some great podcasts about everything, but particularly about Black Lives Matter. But two books that I've been reading that I've mentioned already on the podcast, certainly one of them, is Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. And to be honest, I think all white people should go and read that book and do the work. We did it together as a group, a discussion club within my group on Facebook. And we had women from the US, from South Africa, and from the UK. And it was so empowering to sit together. We were, all but one of us were white. And we sat down and we talked about these issues. And it was very empowering to be able to talk these issues through in detail and to be able to be honest, be vulnerable, be open about, where we can go from here. And I wanted to just touch on some of the things that I have been learning, because there's a whole new vocabulary and terminology about which I had no idea. So the very first term that we started to talk about was white privilege and what that actually means. And since I read this book about white supremacy, I read another book by Rennie Edo-Lodge, which discusses the UK experience of racism. And that book is called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And I wanted to, first of all, just give you a little quote from her about what white privilege is, because a lot of people will think, well, I'm not privileged as a white person. I have, had a difficult time in life. It hasn't been easy. I'm poor. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have much status. But I wanted to just refer to something that she says. When I talk about white privilege, I don't mean that white people have it easy, that they've never struggled, or that they've never lived in poverty. But white privilege is the fact that if you're white, your race will almost certainly positively impact your life's trajectory in some way, and you probably won't even notice it. And then she goes on to say, which I think this is absolutely brilliant, white privilege is an absence of the consequences of racism, an absence of structural discrimination, an absence of your race being viewed as a problem first and foremost. And I think that really hits it on the head, because it's that absence. And therefore we can't, or I'm saying we, me as a white person, it's difficult for me to then appreciate something that is an absence, which is a lack. It's something not happening to me rather than something specifically happening to me. So that's been very powerful. So that's one thing, first of all. But lots of other phrases like tone policing. So what's tone policing? And we had a conversation about this in the book club, because often, we might think we're the enlightened white people, we're talking about race and racism and we're trying to do something. But then we're trying to talk to other people who simply don't want to engage with us. And then we were talking, well, do we need to therefore tone police ourselves, make what we're saying palatable to other people to be able to hear it so that they can hear what we're trying to say? And this is a big issue that I've heard about, in the black community, where they're fed up with tone policing. They're fed up with, the awful stereotype, for example, of the angry black woman, or just angry black person, particularly when you've got misogyny in there as well, that they don't want to be policed. They don't want to make it palatable for white people. They're fed up with that. And I get that now. Having read this book, I get it. I suppose more open to hearing what may initially come across to me as quite aggressive words. And I don't take aggression well. All you got to do to upset me is shout at me and I'll crumble. You know, I'll come back afterwards and I'll punch you in the face probably. But initially my reaction will be to crumble because I don't handle conflict well. It's not what I'm about and I don't like it. But to engage with this, I need to be able to hear the message regardless of how it's communicated and not to switch off because it doesn't sound nice. So I found that really powerful. White fragility is this thing about where we get defensive. We, again, I'm saying we, where white people like me get defensive. You see, I have to catch myself. But I am at least catching myself now when I'm saying this. I can, hear that I'm assuming that you as my listener are white by saying we. And I can't do that because hopefully some of you out there are not, which would be great. And, if I'm getting it all wrong, just send me an email and say, Rachel, this wasn't perhaps the most sensible thing to be saying as a white, middle-class, middle-aged woman. Whatever. I'm open to all of that. But white fragility is something that we need to get over. We, people like me, need to get over because it just closes down the discussion again. It's about when we get defensive and we say we're not racist because we see racism as a proactive racist act. But what I am now seeing is that our silence makes us racist. And that is what I have learned. And that is why I'm going to, keep going on about this. This is going to be part of my campaigning now, just as much, I hope, as anti-ageism. And I'm hoping that this focus on one kind of prejudice will actually have a brilliant knock-on effect to all kinds of prejudice. And then we'll get into intersectionality, which I discussed one of my lovely guests recently when I talked to Claire Hodgson, who is one of the stars of the fabulous play Midlife, which had a sellout run at the Barbican Theatre here in London. And she's totally focused on diversity in the performing arts. And we were talking with her about intersectionality and the fact that for so many people there are layers of prejudice. That might be, that they're a person of colour. That's one prejudice. They might not be heterosexual. They might be disabled. And then, of course, they might be over 45, 50. So you get the whole package of different types of prejudice. And that is what we mean when we talk about intersectionality. So that's another fascinating podcast to go and listen to as well. So there's been lots of very inspiring women for me to talk to. Another one, Julie Owen Moylan, a Welsh writer who will be publishing her first novel soon. And she taught me the wonderful phrase that to go through life, we want to be making the most of our precious heartbeats. And that if we're ever contemplating whether or not something is a good use of our time, then that's the question to ask ourselves. So 2020 feels to me like a year when absolutely everything has been thrown up in the air and we're waiting to see where all the cards fall. I am very keen that we don't miss this opportunity to create something new, a new normal, something different, and not just go back to doing what we've always done. But as we all adapt to this new world, I want you to remember that while our physical world may have shrunk, our mental and emotional world can expand. And we can let it expand because there is nothing to stop us from dreaming and planning what we want to do next. while we are in this stage of life. And obviously, I know that many of you may have difficulties with work and home life and finances. We're all grappling with so many issues. But I hope that there is still room in there to continue or start really thinking about what you want your new normal to look like, and not just to continue the way you always have. Because 2020 almost feels to me like the marker of menopause, but on steroids. This is forcing the world to rethink everything in much the same way that often the menopause forces us to rethink things, which was one of the themes in the podcast with Angela about menopause and hormones and immune systems, that when we have menopause symptoms, they're not symptoms of menopause as such, that they are symptoms associated with menopause, and that menopause exacerbates existing issues rather than necessarily causing them. So we have that moment in time when we can sit down and think, okay, well, what don't I want, and what do I want to take forward, and what do I need to change in terms of my diet or my health or my emotional well-being? Because that is so very important, and that has really taken a knock for many of us in 2020 so far this year. But one thing I am learning is that we have an incredible amount of power and resilience inside ourselves. And it's taken me all my life to realise that. Not all my life, half my life. Hopefully, if I'm going to live to 100 and... God, it's got to be 108 now. It's taken me a long time to realise that we have these inner sources of strength on which we can draw if we trust ourselves, if we look within, if we listen to our bodies. And many of the women that I talked to on the podcast reinforce this, and got a lovely one coming up that will do exactly that. And when I met her and became friends with her, she taught me so much. Everybody that I talk to on the podcast teaches me something. But I am learning to look within. I'm starting to journal, for example, which I'm finding very, very powerful. And I think our next book in the book club will probably be The Artist's Way. And it's interesting to me that when I first started on this entrepreneurial journey, which is 4 or 5 years ago, I was in what they call a mastermind group. And there was a woman in there doing The Artist's Way and doing morning pages as part of her morning routine. And morning pages is effectively where you sit down and you free write. So you don't think about what you're writing. It's just an unconscious stream of thought, and your pen just moves across the paper and you don't think about what it is that you're writing. But you write 3 pages of A4 every morning, and I've been doing that for a short while now, and I'm finding it really powerful for getting stuff out of my head, centering myself, grounding myself. And I would really recommend it, actually. Give it a go, try it. I'm finding it really helpful. But it's interesting to me that it's taken me 5 years to really embrace that. And part of what I do about sharing all of these things is because I don't want other women to take as long as I did to find and develop the tools that enable us to really transition through midlife and have, hopefully, a magnificent next chapter. So take some time to think about what you want in your life as well as what you would like the world to look like. And do not assume that just because this is the way it is, that's the way it has to be. That simply isn't the case. We have so much more power than we think we do. And we still have power, even if our physical world is constrained, if we can't, go out and do exactly what we want to do. There's an awful lot of power we can have behind a keyboard and a microphone and a webcam. So I think I'll leave that there for now. Thank you so much for listening to me. I realise it's been a little bit of a rant, a bit of a witter, a bit of a stream of consciousness. But I just wanted to check in and, share a little bit about where I am. I continue to be excited about the opportunities going forward, both for us individually and us for the world. And I am more and more excited about the potential for women in midlife and beyond stepping forward, not stepping back. Don't see yourself as invisible and then become invisible. Step forward, start ranting, become a keyboard warrior, whatever it is. But make your voice heard, because the world needs us. My goodness, the world needs us. I have never been more convinced the fact that the world needs us. Women do not start wars, generally speaking. I can't think of a woman who has started a war. We don't do that. We want consensus. We want to build community. We don't tend to be as selfish as men can be. We are focused on what's good for more of us rather than one of us. But if we are going to be powerful, then let's be powerful as women. Let's step into that feminine power. Let's use what we have innately and not try and be something else. But there you go. Yeah, I think there are so many possibilities, so many things that we can do. So stick with me, keep listening to the podcast. If you need more resources, come on over to the website, all sorts of things there. If you have more time now, come and do the Midlife Wellness Reboot program. If you want to do some mentoring, come and do that with me, one-to-one. We can do all sorts of things. We have the members club, if you just want to explore all the different workshops and resources in there. So there's lots of things we can do to change the world, to make it a better world. So thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share it, and leave me a review wherever you're listening. It really helps me get the message out. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you'll find strategies, support, and resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Get clarity on how to make the most of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.